It's the beginning of November 2022, and I have travelled into the west central part of London to visit KJ West 1, who are a very well reputed, very long established hi-fi dealership or retailer. And this is my first visit to the store, and you're greeted with a lovely store type front with some very hi-fi, eye candy, prestigious brands. Starting with the big Wilson XVX, I think, speakers, which are pretty stand out. And then there's lots of other beautiful brands, beautiful pieces of hi-fi gear from Macintosh, Solution, Audio Research. But the reason I'm here is for the UK, or really Europe's, press event premiere launch of Wilson Audio's brand new Alexia V speakers. Alexia V, not Alexia 5. So I've been here today with other members of the UK press and a few other people too. And we had an excellent presentation from Peter Mc Grath, who I think is sales director for Wilson Audio. And I got as much of that on camera for you as possible. Now, I placed a microphone on Peter's jacket. I didn't put it in the perfect place. There's a little bit of rustle in the sound recording. I apologise for that. But it was a really interesting presentation to learn a little bit more about the speakers, a little bit more about Wilson Audio's history, and a little bit more about, I suppose, what makes the new Alexia V improved and special over the previous models. Now, I haven't got a huge amount of experience listening to Wilson Audio speakers to say how the new V model is an improvement over the original, which was the second version. I don't have that level of experience, but I can say it's been a very, very impressive day of sound. Initially, there was music playing off of vinyl, which was extremely impressive, using a Vertier turntable, a lovely turntable. And then there was a selection of music played through a digital full DCS system. Some of that was commercial music streamed from the cloud, and some of that was Peter's own recordings. And interestingly, listening to a hi-fi system of this kind of quality, so we've got, Wilson Audio, Alexia V speakers at £80,000. There's a Dart Seal preamplifier, Dart Seal monoblock power amplifiers. I'm not familiar with the models, but they are really particularly nice. You've also got what I assume is very high level transparent cables. So this is a very aspirational hi-fi system. And of course you expect good sound quality. But what's interesting is I've heard lots of hi-fi systems at this kind of price and quality level, and they all do things a little bit differently. And the thing that stood out to me about this particular system and the way it's been set up is every piece of music, from orchestral stuff through a whole variety of different music, everything sounded, I'm going to use the word beautiful. There was just a lovely sweetness, gracefulness, real delicacy to how everything has been presented. And I think what that does, a hi-fi system that presents music that way, is it just draws you in. When I was standing at the back, I'll show you on camera what my view was like. And I found myself just kind of leaning more and more forwards as I was getting drawn more and more into the music, especially at the kind of volumes we was listening at, which was very loud. I think it'd be very easy for a hi-fi system to really shout at you and really blast sound at you with really, fantastic clarity and quality, but it could easily push you the other way. And that might be what you're looking for. But this particular system was doing the opposite. It was just pulling me more and more in. Every piece of music that came on was just pulling me more in. And I think what was happening was I was just focusing on things like how this has been produced, or how this soundstage being created, or maybe the tonal qualities of the different instruments that we was listening to, or the tonal qualities of the music. And one particular piece that Peter put on is actually the first one that he played that he recorded himself. Wow, the soundstage. I felt almost like I was there, almost like I was at the recording venue, as much as a hi-fi system can deliver that. But I'm going to pass you over to Peter now, Peter Mc Grath, for his explanation about the speakers and more. I hope you enjoy it. And if you're interested in this system, interested in any of these components, I would say, contact KJ West 1 and arrange a demo. Come in and see the guys and have a listen to this system for yourself. I think for everybody else where a system like this is way more aspirational than is real, which is the same for me too. I'm sure these speakers will be demonstrated at hi-fi shows and stuff. So I'm sure everybody will get a chance to listen to these speakers at some point. But if you're in the UK, if this kind of system is of interest to you, well then speak to KJ West 1 and obviously come in for a demo yourself. I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. I've really enjoyed my day here today. Hopefully I get to come back here in the future and maybe look at and listen to some other awesome bits of hi-fi. Thanks very much. Take care. See you soon. All the best. Bye.
As he said, I'm Peter McGrath. I'm with Wilson Audio, and I see a lot of familiar faces, but there are also people who I don't think I've ever seen or met before. And just to start with just a little bit of a personal biography, then I'll get on to the business of Wilson. I've been involved with the art of music reproduction since the late 60s and all the way through the 70s. I ran a retail store, and I aspired for 25 years to be what KJ is today. I had a high-end store in Florida, and I sold and represented many of the top brands. And indeed, from the mid-'80s on, I was a Wilson Audio dealer and one of the best in the U.S. for many, many years. I've also developed a parallel career as a classical music recording engineer. I worked for many years for Harmonia Mundi, and I've also been involved in location recording for the last 4 decades. So that's a bit of my background. But then I sold my business in '96. My former employees now own and operate that business. And I got a call from my dear friend David Wilson to go up and meet with him, and that was about 23 years ago, and I've been stuck there ever since. So, but it's been a joyous thing, and I have to admit that one of the greatest losses of my life was what, in my estimation, was a premature passing of Dave. In fact, I met Dave long before he decided to get into audio, and before I decided. I was going to graduate school studying photography, and he wandered into a hi-fi shop I was working part-time in Chicago, and I sold him an audio research preamplifier, which he then modified because he really wasn't in the loudspeaker business. He was starting a recording company, and the company came to be known as Wilson Audio Specialties. And he came in shopping for a preamp, and Jason, you can understand this. I'm in the store 2 weeks later after he bought it, carrying it in. I had no idea who he really was, just that this is a great guy that I got to like, and carrying it in and hand hold, and there's a smile across his face, ear to ear. First words out of his mouth is, no, Peter, it's not what you think. I wanted to show you something. So he plops it down and takes the cage off, and I see, oh my gosh, there's a lot of things different inside. He'd put these 2 circuit board shelves inside, and my gosh, what on earth did you do? Well, I have to make a confession. I wasn't really shopping for a preamplifier. I'm starting a record company, and I wanted to make the world's best microphone preamp. And I thought, why not get the very finest phono preamp that's out there? It gives the requisite gain of roughly 60 dB. Problem, of course, is the RIAA. Well, you can eliminate the RIAA. So I put these little card holders in, where if I put this card in, all of the resistors and capacitors that formulate the RIAA curve are engaged, as they were. Take it out, put another bypass cap in, and now it's 60 dB of open gain. And he was starting his company, which consisted of that preamplifier, a pair of AKG 414 microphones, and a Revox A77, highly modified by him. That was the beginning of Wilson Audio Specialties, 1972. He then went his way. I went to Florida, started my hi-fi store, and many years later, I wind up working with him. But back then, the first words out of my mouth after the modification was, you realize it's no longer under warranty. And despite that, we remained friends until the day he passed. Before the existence of what in my mind is one of the great audio geniuses of our time, I knew Dave before his son Daryl was born. And Daryl he worked sweeping floors at the company. He also worked with his dad from the age of 5, attending recording sessions with him. He was very much involved, forced to listen. He wasn't given an allowance. He was only given resources if he worked, did certain things and so forth. But over the years, so long-term, Daryl is by no means a newcomer to the world of audio. Of course, I'm speaking of the current CEO of Wilson Audio, who is Daryl Wilson, who has been singularly responsible for the design of the Sabrina X, the Alexia I, the Alexia II, and now the Alexia V, the XVX loudspeaker, the Alex V loudspeaker, the Loki subwoofer, and just about you name it, everything. And as you all know, the Wham was Dave's living testimony to his state of the art, which he worked on for 5 years before he died. So in a sense, I've covered the brand, most of which today are now the fruit of the results of frankly, the genius and the hard work that Daryl has put in. Not only singularly Daryl, he's also developed an incredible team of engineers that work with him. So it's not just a singular heroic effort on his part. We've got a team. Wilson Audio consists of 52 people total, and the average tenure of the employees at Wilson Audio is roughly 17 years, including the people who are the artisans who hand fabricate the products. We make everything in-house, save for the drivers. We source the drivers from various places, predominantly Scandinavia, and many of them also North America. But we modify them rather significantly. But they're also designed by us and then fabricated by them. At this point, almost every driver and every Wilson speaker is designed by us with their cooperation and then incorporated in. So that's a little bit of the background. And as I've implied, there are two versions of this speaker that precede it. The original Alexia 1 was about 12 years ago. The Alexia 2 about 5 to 6 years ago. And now this speaker, which is rather recently introduced. And it's not called the Alexia 5, it's called the Alexia V. And the V stands for a new material that's incorporated in the loudspeaker. And the V nomenclature has its origin in the XVX speaker, which replaces the Alexandria speaker. And the V stands, again, as I said, for a material. And that's something that the research at Wilson has developed. As you know, we use our X material in the basic fabrication of the enclosures. The V material is a rather strategically applied material that has significantly better acoustic absorption characteristics. The entire top plate up here, if you look carefully, you'll see there's an insert that covers the whole top surface. That is made out of the V material. All of the spiking arrangement and the resonant modes that come from this go to that. And then they're damped before they even get into this enclosure, and vice versa. The ones emanating from here are damped before they get into this. So it's an incredibly beautiful, elegant way of isolation. The net result of which is that it allows the speaker to reduce to black even quickly. You'll find as we listen, the noise floor on the speaker is vanishingly low. The basic enclosure is made out of the same X material that we've been using for years. And then the baffle on this mid-range driver is made out of what we call M material, which is also the material we've been using on the mid-range baffle for all of our various models. Other things that differentiate this model from the model it replaces is that the level of precision for the adjustment of the tweeter module has a higher level of resolution. The spacing is even smaller so that we can get even more precise increments in terms of how we adjust this. As just a brief aside, as many of you know, we have been champions of time alignment. That's different than phase alignment. So what we're really actually doing is we can, as on this model and on the DAW loudspeaker and on the 2 or 3 models above this, what we have is a capability of being able to move the drivers in position relative to their respective drivers that are neighboring them. The idea being that we can actually align the timing so that the arrival of the initial transient impulse arrives in sync. And you happen to be sitting in the spot for which the speaker is precisely calibrated. What Jason and I did is we measured the height of your ear off the ground. Then we measured the distance from where you're seated to the front baffle. Then we refer to a table which tells us exactly how to adjust the various modules so that the time alignment gets, and in the context of this loudspeaker, we're looking at in the neighborhood of about 10, I believe, or 11 microseconds of precision timing alignment between the various drivers. And in the case of the XVX, that gets, and the Wham, it gets down to around 2 microseconds. Another component that's unique in this design that it surpasses the predecessor is we're using what we call a Quadra-Mag Alnico mid-range driver. It's a superb driver. It had its origin in the speaker called the XVX as well. It's the same 7-inch, and it migrated down into the Alex V and now into this. It's a truly remarkable driver. I'll let it literally speak for itself. Also, the tweeter, while it's the diaphragm and the motor assembly is identical to most of our other speakers, what happens that is unique in this design and also in the Alex V is what happens to the back wave coming out of the tweeter. It goes into a custom fabricated carbon printed enclosure, which actually adds considerably to the dissipation of the back wave energy. It significantly improves the transient response, clarity, smoothness, and beauty of the sound of the tweeter over its predecessor. Even though it looks identical, its sonic characteristics are rather significantly improved. Additionally, over the course of the years, very recently, we had the good fortune. Actually, Daryl got a phone call from a company called RelCaps. And they have been manufacturing our capacitors along with capacitors for various and sundry other high-end electronics companies and also for the military. And the founder at age 84 called Daryl to tell him, I'm hanging it up. Better start finding another source for your capacitors because we're only going to be doing this for so much longer. And Daryl's response was, do you mind if we fly out there and take a look what you're doing? And so he came out there and one thing led to another, and Daryl bought the company. And then we brought all of their tooling and several of their craftsmen back to Provo. We are now making all the capacitors on our own, in-house. Not only that, but we've acquired not only their technology, but it enables us to take that level of technology to a much higher level. So we're now building capacitors down to 0.1% tolerance, which is unheard of. Before, we would achieve 1% by using a capacitor and using like a dozen little mini caps, bypass caps, get it down to that 1%. And the reason we're doing that is we want that level of precision in our crossovers. We're now doing that with a single cap, which is custom made using our own materials. Also, we're using different winding characteristics and so forth. So capacitors play a major role. And this loudspeaker, along with Alex V, and the DAW and the XVX all have the benefit of our new capacitor designs. And this is a big deal. Physically, the woofer enclosure is about 8% bigger, but that 8% manifests itself in a level of bass that I think will shock all of you. I cannot think of a speaker that has a footprint anywhere near this size that is capable of producing not only the frequency range, but the speed and transparency in the bass that this is doing. And thanks to the hard work that Jason and his team have done, and in this room, we're able to render that bass with beauty and clarity in this space. But I've done now about 5 of these, and I've yet to find a room that I couldn't get, really extraordinary bass out of. But this is amongst the best that I've experienced so far. Other little details are, well, the other number that's important, they're around 80,000.
Yeah, 80,000 pounds.
Around 80,000 pounds. And while that's obviously a big number, in terms of where it stands in the marketplace, they represent a pretty extraordinary value. They're relatively efficient at about 90 dB. Yes, the modulus of impedance does dip a bit. So you do want amplifiers that can deliver decent amounts of current. I would highly recommend not using single-ended triodes, but anything above that will work. Even a good 50-watt amp will drive them. We've spared no expense. We're using what is arguably one of the finest solid-state amps around, which is the Dart Seal. It ranks amongst the best. We're using all transparent cabling here. We're using DCS for the digital. And tell me the name of the turntable.
It's the first technology one.
All of the components in our crossovers are point-to-point, all models. And the other thing that we do in all models is all of those various components, be they resistors, inductors, coils, whatever. They're all point-to-point wired on a skeletal grid. That skeleton is then dropped into a tub with standoff coupling points for soldering to them, and that tub is then filled with epoxy, so that the crossover is essentially a hard, solid, non-resonant brick that could go safely within the enclosure of a speaker and not be affected by the incredibly hostile environment that is what in fact occurs inside of a loudspeaker with all of that vibration. And I remember vividly when Dave invited me up to the factory to join them, he had a breadboard laid out, and we were listening to something in the design, and he pulled a ballpoint pen out of his pocket and said, "Here, while you're listening, tap it." You could actually hear that. You could see it on the scope, the trace shift as you would tap the coil. And then he said, "Okay, now," he said, "take that coil and rotate it 90 degrees and lay it flat on the board, as it would be on a circuit board," and the sound changed. See, one of the beauties of what we do with no crossovers is we design in 3D. In other words, we can orient all of the components in the crossover in the third dimension. You follow? They don't have the constraint of having to be attached to a circuit board. We orient how they relate to each other. And as audiophiles know, we know just even moving wires around can affect how the system sounds. That's no different than what goes on inside of a crossover. And also, another thing that is important, I'm digressing, but I think it's important you understand, is fundamental Wilson principles. Those wires are incredibly expensive. But as is typically the case on most loudspeaker designs, irrespective of their price, you take that incredible wire connected to the binding post, and that signal goes from that wire into a circuit board. Fiberglass with tin. Not the case with any Wilson product. It goes directly to the components via internal cabling, which is calibrated so that each wire going to each driver has a specific number of turns, a specific number of strands, a specific dielectric, so that the inductance value that is precise to validate that 0.1% tolerance is maintained to where the current transfer goes to the tab of the loudspeaker.
So that means every driver in the system has its very own
every driver of every speaker we make. When you visit the factory, you'll see walls of, this is the tweeter wire for the Sabrina. This is the tweeter wire that goes into a tune tot. This is the twisted wire that goes into a wham. Each one is hand individually made.